Hello, and welcome back to our Scrum Study course on a guide to the Scrum body of knowledge. We are in Module 4 of the SBOC of Chapter Change, where we have just finished learning about changes in Scrum and achieving flexibility, and in this session, we are going to learn how change requests are assessed and approved or rejected when applying the Scrum framework. Whether the project requirements are generally stable, and there are typically only minor changes, or whether the project requirements change throughout the project, change management is executed in the ongoing processes of prioritizing and adding tasks to the prioritized product backlog. By locking down the scope of every sprint, the team is able to efficiently optimize and manage their work and effort. Biggest advantage of Scrum framework is that the team does not have to worry about managing changes once they start working on a sprint. If project requirements are generally stable and major changes are not expected in the near future, the length of a sprint may be set to be longer, 4 to 6 weeks. If project requirements are not very well defined, or if significant changes are expected in the immediate future, the length of sprint may be relatively shorter, 1 to 3 weeks. This provides stability to the Scrum team members to work on shorter sprints and deliver results. It is important to note that expected change is not the only factor used to determine the length of sprint. Other factors that are also needed to be considered include actual time to get work done, planned date for a release, any other factor as determined by the product owner or Scrum Master that need to be considered while determining the length of sprint. Length of sprint should preferably be consistent. One of the greatest impacts of changing the length of sprint is that it causes a reset on all tracking at the project level. Previous velocities may become useless for forecasting and planning of future sprints. Without an accurate velocity, which is a primary metric in any Scrum project, the Scrum team cannot be measured for effectiveness. Grooming helps ensure that refining of requirements and their user stories is done well in advance of the sprint planning meeting, so that the team has a well-analyzed and clearly defined set of stories that can be easily broken down into tasks and subsequently estimated. The product owner is responsible for adding and revising prioritized product backlog items in response to any changes, and is responsible for providing more detailed user stories that will be used for the next sprint. It is important to note that any item in the prioritized product backlog is always open for re-estimation until the sprint backlog is finalized in the Create Sprint Backlog process. After that, changes can continue to be made until ultimately prior to the sprint planning meeting if required. An effective grooming session should result in clearly defined prioritized product backlog items, PBIs, so that the Scrum team clearly understands what the customer's requirements are. Acceptance and done criteria may also be discussed during grooming sessions. Although the product owner has the final say on prioritized product backlog items and whether to accept or reject any user stories, it is the Scrum Master's responsibility to ensure that the requirements and acceptance criteria are not altered during the sprint review meeting for the user stories completed in the current sprint. This brings us to the end of our session on the integrating change in Scrum and how change requests are assessed and approved. I look forward to seeing you in our next session on the impact of changes at the program and portfolio levels.